Hello, everyone, and welcome to part 4 of Cyclica's AI My Homework. If you're joining us for the first time, this is a 7-part webinar series that will be providing key perspectives in the exciting field of AI and drug discovery. In the past few weeks, we've explored the importance of biology and health and the essential considerations needed for developing medicines. We've also looked at how computational approaches can be applied to the drug discovery process. Last week, we also had a special session focused on entrepreneurship and career development from renowned leaders in the industry. If you missed any of the previous sessions, a link to the recording will be shared with you via email before each session. Today, we'll be exploring the world of artificial intelligence, and your companion is our machine learning researcher, Ali Madani.
Thanks, Lavesh, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. I'm Ali, and I'm going to talk about AI in healthcare. But before getting started in this topic, let me explain a little bit about my journey. So I started my high school being interested in physics, calculus, biology, almost everything, except chemistry, actually. And it was mainly maybe because my teachers were better in those subjects. So this is the high school thing, and it's something common. I was interested in physics, so I started learning more about physics. I got silver medal in physics Olympiad in the national level back in my home country. But I chose to go to mechanical engineering, maybe because of job market, because there were more engineering jobs back in Iran. So I'm originally from Iran. So I went to mechanical engineering school in University of Tehran. And then I realized in the second year that I like science more than engineering. And it was fine. I still liked calculus, physics, biology, nothing much changed. I realized I like computational modeling, but I needed to figure out how I can get into science and somehow combine those topics. So at the time, the interdisciplinary areas was not that much common in Iran. So I decided to come to Canada. I joined mechanical engineering department in the University of Waterloo. And I started working in a topic called computational biomechanics. And it was amazing because it was a combination of many topics I liked: computational modeling, biology, mechanical and physical modeling. And it was all good. And I could finish it within a year. It was a little bit fast, and I couldn't realize again what I want to do. And that's very important, but that could happen to you as well. And it was fine. I decided to continue my studies. I wanted to go to PhD and get my PhD degree, but I didn't know what I wanna do in my PhD. So I decided to go to second master's, get my second master's. I went to Department of Mathematics in University of Waterloo because I was also interested in disease modeling and cancer. I combined whatever I liked with this topic. I started working cancer modeling. And one reason behind my interest in cancer was losing many of my family members, my grandfathers, my aunt, and my uncle because of cancer. So I decided to work on cancer and cancer modeling, which was a combination of my interest in computational modeling and cancer. But still, it was not enough for me. So I realized it is good, but I became interested in something else, and that was machine learning. I didn't know much about machine learning. Maybe everybody knows about regression in bachelor, but we don't know much about machine learning if you are not in computer science or computer engineering. So I decided to go to PhD school and joined medical biophysics department, University of Toronto, working with two amazing faculty members, Benjamin Hapkins and Matthew Lupien. Started working with machine learning modeling of cancer with the focus on genomics and epigenomics. Those are some specific kind of molecular profiling for tumors. And in the second year, I realized, okay, so I am interested in these topics and I need to choose one of them. It's becoming a bit maybe late to just jump around. And it was not only because I felt that it's late, because I fell in love with machine learning, because it provided me the tools I wanted for a long time to solve different problems. So I started learning more and more about machine learning, and eventually I started even teaching machine learning with the focus in healthcare. And last year I joined Cyclica, the machine learning team in Cyclica, to work on deep learning platform, deep learning technology we have for drug discovery. So the final love that is the career I'm following now is to find problems and solve them with machine learning, with the focus on healthcare. But I didn't describe it, I didn't tell you this story because of introducing myself. I told you because this is the journey many of you may have gone through. So it takes time, but eventually our sculptures will be beautiful. So wait for it if you are not there yet. So let's get into AI in healthcare. If we get back to the traditional medicine, this is how it was done. So we had doctors, patient checkup, previous knowledge, combining them together. Then we had known rules to see if, for example, the patient has this color on his or her skin, the color of eye, and other kind of information, what the doctor has to do for disease diagnosis, for treatment assignment, if, for example, the patient has cancer, to check aggressiveness of the tumor. So it was all based on the information that the doctors had from previous observation of nature or patients to come up with hypotheses and then come up with known rules. And those rules were discovered by doctors or scientists. And it was all okay, but we needed to go a bit faster. We didn't know enough knowledge about all diseases. We didn't know how to assess aggressiveness of different diseases. And we didn't know about the diseases to design treatment for them. So we didn't have good treatment for all diseases and all patients. And that brought the scientists to work on three important topics. One, they needed to have model systems to test their hypothesis instead of testing everything on patients, because we cannot test everything on patients. So it limits ourselves. We also needed to have more data about diseases and patients. So it was not possible to discover everything based on the traditional technologies. So we needed to have better technologies to extract better information and more information about the diseases to help us realize what's going on in diseases and design better diagnosis strategies and better diagnostics strategies and better treatments. And at the end, when we had more data, there was a need for proper tools to extract new rules from those data. And this is where AI came into the picture. For the model systems, instead of patient samples, scientists started to work on animal models and cell lines, or many other model systems that we have nowadays. And maybe you've heard of clinical trials. This is usually how it's done. Whenever something has been tested in cell lines and then animal models, it gets into phase 1 clinical trial to test for toxicity, and then the other phases of clinical trials. So it's not possible to jump and test everything on patients. It doesn't make sense. And these model systems provide us the opportunity to test more and more hypotheses and make the process of hypothesis development or even data-driven discoveries, validation of data-driven discoveries faster and faster. But starting from Human Genome Project, we also got access to more information. Now we have larger scale data, which are called omics data. We have genomics data, transcriptomics data, epigenomics data, and so on. And these are molecular level information, either within human cells, could be healthy cells, cancer cells or so, or in the microenvironment that exists in our body. It could be in the blood, it could be in the microenvironments of the tumor, and so on. And those informations were very important for either hypothesis-based approach or data-driven approach to use AI on that. I will describe a little bit more about some of these, but let's get into the AI in healthcare. So we had previously the hypothesis-based approach, and it was similar diagram. So we had patient checkup, known rules, and then diagnosis and treatment. One thing that got changed was that instead of just having a hypothesis-based rule development and rule discovery, now we have AI-driven and computational-based rule discovery. And we also have model system that we can use to validate our discoveries and extract more and more information regarding different diseases. So altogether, we are now in an era that we can move faster to identify better diagnostic strategies and treatments. But it was all possible because of artificial intelligence. Not all of it, but partially because of artificial intelligence. But let's see what artificial intelligence is. Artificial intelligence is about algorithms that are supposed to mimic our intelligence and our behavior. And honestly, we are not good at artificial intelligence yet. We are getting there, but whatever you see out there is about machine learning, which is under the umbrella of artificial intelligence. Machine learning is not supposed to necessarily mimic our behavior, but it's about algorithms that learn new rules from data or experience. And this is exactly what we talked about when we talked about AI in healthcare. And maybe you've heard of something else, and that's deep learning. Remember that deep learning or deep neural network is only part of machine learning, is one set of approaches for under the umbrella of machine learning. So we have artificial intelligence, we have machine learning, and we have deep learning. Great. In a machine learning process, so the focus is machine learning. So whatever we discuss, whatever you see out there as AI in healthcare are mainly machine learning. So machine learning processes have three important parts: collecting data, cleaning and curating data, and then using that curated data for model building and model evaluation, and eventually presenting the results. And the glory usually goes to this model building and model evaluation, but the two other parts are very, very important. Whatever you see out there in public repositories are clean and curated data, usually. So this part has been already done. But when you get into real problems, either in academia, when you do research, or in industry, when you're dealing with a problem, you want to solve a problem, you want to solve a problem for a customer or client, then you need to collect the data yourself. You need to clean it yourself. You need to curate it yourself, and then use it for model building. So this part is very important. It is sometimes a tedious job, but it's a very important part, and it takes actually most important part of the time of many companies to collect data, have a good data set, and then start model building. But presenting the results also matter. Imagine you have a machine learning model and you want to present it to a doctor. And then what you present is accuracy is 90%. So who cares? Why doctors should care accuracy is 90% when you are not describing what accuracy is, what exactly you're modeling, what information you're using, what you're trying to predict. You don't have good visualization. So all those parts also matter. So because the glory usually goes to model building and model evaluation, don't forget about the rest of this pipeline. So it is a complicated and long process to start from data collection, pre-processing, cleaning, curation, and then preparing the data set you want for machine learning modeling, implementing the algorithm you have, coming up with the best model, and then present your results to the clients, to your supervisor, to your, not your doctor, to a doctor that you are collaborating with, and then have the pipeline ready. So this is a very important thing to keep in mind, that when you talk about machine learning, don't just pay attention to this middle part. We have different variable types. And by variable types, I mean different information that we can use in healthcare for using machine learning in healthcare. We can have medical information. It could be about previous prescriptions of specific drugs. It could be survey information, the age of patient, the weight of patient. And we can have molecular features. And molecular features like the blood tests you have, and then you have the information regarding your vitamin B level, your hemoglobin level, and all those kinds of things. And then you have features within molecules, like mutation. Maybe you've heard of BRCA mutation, which increases risk of breast cancer. Okay, so we have different types of variables. And later we can see that we have different technologies to get all these kind of information. And these information, these variables exist in different levels. So we have atomic information, molecular level, cellular level, down to organism. And it matters to keep this in mind because they are in different scales. So atom, molecule, cell, tissue, organ, system, organism, they are in different scales, from angstrom to centimeter or even meter. And we care about it because we need different technologies. We need different advanced or maybe very, very sophisticated technology, measure this information, and then use the information in machine learning modeling for diagnosis or for treatment assignment or for drug discovery and so on. And all those variables are in 3 different data types. Either we have survey information, the ones that we discussed, not everything in healthcare. Either we have survey information, which doesn't need any sort of measurement, and we will get into it, like age. We have macroscopic measurements that provide us high-level information without molecular level information. And that could be enough for a specific task, like bone fracture. So in bone fracture, who cares what's going on in the molecular level? We care about bone fracture. We want to see if there is any fracture in the X-ray or not. And we have microscopic measurement. And in microscopic measurement, we try to capture molecular level information and then use it for other tasks. As I said, we have survey information like age. We have other survey type information, medical information like gender or medication history, prescription of doctors for that specific patient. And all these information can help us to realize if the patient has a specific risk of disease, for example. If patient use a specific type of drug, maybe because of toxicity, he is prone to a new disease. Okay, so those are type of information that we can use. Very easy to get, except for ethical issues. You should have consent from the patient to use their information, but they don't need advanced technologies. And then we have macroscopic measurements, but macroscopic measurements need different types of technologies. We can have very simple technologies for height measurement or weight measurement. We can have a little bit more advanced technologies for blood pressure and heartbeat. Also for heartbeat measurement, it's not that complicated still, but it is a bit maybe more advanced. And we can have very advanced technologies and very expensive and complicated like CT scan and ultrasound imaging. And these information can provide, these different type of information can help us to solve different problems and implement machine learning for different tasks. For example, we can implement machine learning on blood pressure to somehow assess risk of heart attack, if we have blood pressure measurement every day from a patient or every week from a patient, and we can use machine learning on CT scan for tumor categorization to see if patient first has a tumor or not, and if the tumor is benign or malignant. Ultrasound is very familiar for most of you. It is used for pregnancy tests, not a test, just for checking the infant, and it's used for other tasks as well, although there are advancements in all these every year, which help us to solve more and more problems. And then we have microscopic measurements. In microscopic measurement setting, we have also a bit simpler technologies like blood sugar. Also, they're amazing and very important technologies, but a bit simpler and much cheaper. We have histopathological imaging, not cheap, very hard to interpret. You need expert to interpret them, similar to other imaging technologies. And also we have molecular feature measurements. So starting from Human Genome Project, now we have better and better technologies, more advanced technologies to measure molecular features like DNA level information, protein level information, RNA level information. And all those also can be used for diagnosis and treatment assignment. The example for genetic information that I mentioned before is BRCA. So also BRCA doesn't need this kind of whole DNA level information. It's a specific gene mutation, but these technologies are very useful to come up with some of these diagnosis and treatment assignment strategies. And all these molecular features are part of central dogma of biology. And I'm not talking about central dogma of biology because of teaching, because I want to teach biology, but because I want to say it's a complicated process. So we have DNA, RNA, and proteins all working together within human cells. So we have healthy cells, everything is fine. If something goes wrong within each one of these level features, the health can go cancerous, or the cells can be killed by immune system because they are not healthy anymore. So many things can happen, but we don't have enough knowledge and information regarding this complex system to figure out everything. If we had all the information we needed, we could diagnose all diseases and we could identify treatment for all diseases as well. But it is a complicated process. We need more data and we need better machine learning models to identify the relationship between these features, between changes in these features and diseases. One level of information I talked about is protein. When we talk about protein, protein is a series of amino acids. So imagine there are chemical residues attached together, but it's not a snake-shaped chain as I showed here. It's a complicated structure, and that structure determines function of the protein, like hemoglobin that I showed here, and it's very important for oxygen transfer in human blood. And this is what we do in Cyclica. So in Cyclica, we use structural information of proteins, chemical and structural information of small molecules, and we try to predict interaction between proteins and small molecules. Why? Because it helps us to identify new drugs, to discover new drugs for diseases if we know which protein is responsible or important for that disease, or vice versa. If we have a known drug or a small molecule, we will be able to identify which proteins that a small molecule or drug will hit. But we have also DNA and RNA level information. And it is very complicated and at the same time simple. So we have 4 bases in DNA level: cytosine, guanine, adenine, and thymine, CGAT. And we have For others, so 3 of them are the same, just uracil change between DNA and RNA. We have cytosine, guanine, adenine, and uracil in RNA level. And these 4 determine different RNAs and different genes in human DNA. Okay, and when we talk about DNA, it's not all about genes. We have a non-coding part of DNA, which there is no gene, but proteins can bind to those parts and determine fate of cells, fate of human cells. So it's a very complicated process, but everything are based on these 4 in DNA level and these 4 in RNA level. And then we have some extra chemical features coming into the picture, like addition of chemical groups like methyl, if you're familiar with chemistry, or addition of proteins to different part of DNA or a specific RNA. And all those information can help us to understand what's going on in different diseases. Okay, so when we have technologies to measure these kind of information, these kind of features, then we are able to use machine learning. So we have now the technologies to measure those, so we can use them in machine learning modeling to see if there is a specific changes in DNA or RNA associated with a specific disease. So let's start talking about machine learning. So we have different types of machine learning. We have supervised learning, we have unsupervised learning, and reinforcement learning. So the focus of what you see out there in healthcare is mainly in the supervised learning part, somehow in unsupervised learning, not yet much in reinforcement learning, but I'm going to describe each one of them. In supervised learning, you have a specific features like protein level features, small molecule level features, and you try to identify a relationship between those features and a specific outcome, a specific output variable. For example, we want to predict if a protein interacts with a drug or a small molecule, or if a patient has cancer or not. And it could be classification or regression. But what's the difference between these two is about type of outcome that we try to predict, type of output variable. In classification, we deal with categorical variable, like patient has disease or not. In regression, we deal with continuous variable. So the variable can have different values. For example, temperature, daily temperature. It could be 20, 21, 22, 21 and a half, or whatever. So they're depending on the type of outcome that we try to predict, we have classification or regression. And then we have unsupervised learning. In unsupervised learning, the difference is we don't try to predict a specific outcome. We try to identify patterns only using the features that we have. One example could be, imagine you have some athletes, and then you try to classify the athletes based on their height. So in average, basketball players are taller, and it makes sense that that's type of the sport they play. So when we cluster them, when we group them together, most of basketball players will be together in a very tall group. And then we have other sports, although they have tall people or shorter people, but it is expected that we have basketball players as separate group. Okay, that's a very simple and understandable example. We can have it also in disease categorization and clustering. For example, we can cluster breast cancer patients, and it has been used using genomic information. And based on that clustering and grouping, we can identify different types of breast cancer and realize that one type will respond to this treatment, one type will not respond to that treatment. And then we have dimensionality reduction, and that dimensionality reduction is a separate realm, and it's about getting rid of some of the maybe irrelevant features or combine the features before using them either in clustering or supervised learning setting. So it's about supervised learning and unsupervised learning. But we have another one which is called reinforcement learning. And the difference between supervised and unsupervised versus reinforcement learning is in supervised and unsupervised learning, the models try to learn from data. So we have data, they try to learn from it. In reinforcement learning, it tries to learn from experience, similar to what we do. So if it is not a technical kind of discussion, but if you think of it, reinforcement learning is a bit closer to what we call as artificial intelligence, to mimic human behavior. Because we get experience, we become better in something, and then we can do new tasks. We can work on new tasks. And this is what's going on in reinforcement learning. Imagine the game of Go or Atari. So these are applications of successful applications of reinforcement learning, although there are many others. And in the game of Atari, reinforcement learning play with the computer, and it becomes better and better as it plays more and more. Instead of having 1 million games played before by a human being and then try to use them to train a supervised learning model. Okay, so that's about different types of machine learning. Let's have a visualized example. In unsupervised learning, as we talk, we can have points, we don't have any label, or we don't have any output value for these data points. In supervised learning, on the other hand, we can have labels in the classification setting. So we can have red dots and blue dots. And in regression, I'll show in the next few slides, we can have continuous output variables. But let's see the difference between how clustering as part of unsupervised learning works and how classification works. So in unsupervised learning, we have these data points. And when we implement clustering, it can identify that these data points are together and these ones are also together. So those are two groups, makes sense when we look at it, but the machine is supposed to do it automatically. And in classification setting, because we have the labels, the goal is to identify this line, and this line is called decision boundary. So it's a boundary that determines which part of this space should be red, although we have some blue data points there, but we don't care because we cannot get 100% accurate. And that's another topic in supervised learning called overfitting. So we want to have a good model that is generalizable to future tasks. You agree, if we have a data point here, it should be more probably red. And if we have a data point here, it should be blue. It makes sense. And this is our decision boundary, and it's linear. It's a line. If you imagine these are our two features. And then we can have nonlinear relationships to identify the decision boundaries. We can also have regression. In the case of regression, what happens is we have input features and we have output variable, and we try to identify a continuous relationship between these features and that continuous variable. And it could be linear regression, which is about finding a line, pathing, just going through these data points, trying to somehow capture the behavior of these data points when we consider the output variable and the input. So there are some math behind it. We try to minimize the difference between the value of this data point and the value that we try to predict in this line. So if you imagine you have X or input value for this data point, or it's better to have the example that I have here. So you have a predicted value and you have an actual value. So we have this difference. If we sum up these differences with this formula, we want to have this to be minimized. That will eventually give us this line. And why we care about this line? Because if we have a new data point and if we have its input value, the feature value, now we can map it to this line and predict that the Y or output value for this data point should be this value. And that's the goal of regression. It's a very, very simplified example, but it tells you about the concept. And we have another topic called artificial neural network. So we have classification and we have regression. Neural network is not parallel to classification and regression or clustering. It's one series of algorithms that can be used to do either classification or clustering or regression. And it is inspired by what's going on in human neural system. So we have our physiological neural network, and we have neurons that transfer the information cells. So from one cell to another series of cells. So from, for example, our skin to brain to decide if something is hot or not. Okay, so those neural systems in our body helped us to come up with this type of machine learning modeling, which is called artificial neural network. In artificial neural network, which I want to describe how it is related to deep learning, we have the input features. So these ones are called neurons. So we have input neurons in the input layer. And then we have some relationship that combines these neuron information in the first input layer to come up with the values of neurons in the second layer, which is called first hidden layer. So we have input layer, we have output layer, and the rest in the middle are hidden layers. So based on these relationships, the value of neurons in the first hidden layer will be identified. And then we have other relationships between these neurons and the neurons in the second hidden layer. So the values of second hidden layer will be identified, and so on. So for the other hidden layers, and eventually the output layer. And this is somehow not exactly similar to what's going on in our physiological neural system. So neurons will transfer the information, and eventually there will be a decision at the end. Okay, so this was about neural network. So let's have a very simplified example. Imagine we try to predict price of houses. We have different input features: size of house, number of bedrooms, postal code, and district wealth. Those are some features that are important to determine house price. Okay, so there are relationships between the input layer and hidden layer, and then eventually the output layer. So these relationships are not something that we determined before. It's something that neural network learns by itself. So we just provide the data, and then the neural network learns what should be the relationship between these two neurons in the first layer or input layer and this one in the first hidden layer. Okay, and then the other relationships that we have in this neural network. And eventually, neural network uses this information to predict house price. So when the neural network starts learning, there is some random relationship between all of the neurons. Okay, so the neurons of this input layer and all of the neurons in the first hidden layer, and neurons of first hidden layer and the output layer neuron. But eventually it learns that some of the relationships are more important. What should be the value of each relationship, because these relationships have some numbers, have some values, or what is called weight. And then it uses those relationships to predict house price. And it does it in a simple yet complicated process. The concept, in my opinion, is simple, but the math behind it could be complicated. So try to separate math from the concept. I'll try to first explain the concept, but if you have questions regarding the math, we can dig into it. So imagine you have input layer. So there are neurons within each layer, and then you have two hidden layers, and then output layer. But before that, let me just do not forget about deep learning. When we talk about deep learning, it's nothing other than having a neural network with 2 hidden layers or more. So if we have 2 hidden layers or more, that's a deep neural network. Okay. So in neural network, when it tries to learn, first, it has to predict something. So this is the whole process in machine learning. The model predicts something and it checks that with the true value or with the true label and see how far it is from the true labels or value, and then it tries to correct itself. And this is what happens also in neural network. So we have something called forward propagation and forward passing. So based on the relationship that we have initially in neural network, and those relationships could be completely random. It doesn't matter. So random relationship, based on those random relationship, neural network transfer the information in the input layer to first hidden layer, and then from first hidden layer to second hidden layer, and then from second hidden layer eventually to output layer to predict, for example, house price, or if a patient has disease or not, or if that drug will interact with this protein or not. Okay, so it goes forward, predicts something, and then it compares, and it understands, oops, prediction is garbage. So it has to somehow correct itself, and it does it in something called backward propagation. So in backward propagation, the neural network goes backward and starts improving, modifying, that will eventually result in improvement of these relationships between different layers. So relationship between hidden layer 2 and output layer, hidden layer 1 and output layer, and input layer and hidden layer 1. And this process goes on, and it results in better and better methodology. So it improves the predictions. And that's the whole concept. Very, very simplified definition of neural network. And we have complex math behind each part. Some part of it are algebraic operations, some part are related to calculus. But you need to understand the concept before getting into math. Because when you know the concept, you can easily understand, okay, so this part of the math relates to that part of the concept of neural network modeling. And this is a very simplified, fully connected neural network. We have other types of neural network modeling, modeling like convolutional neural network. There are some differences, but this concept holds for many types of neural network modeling that we do. Okay, guys, so that was it for this webinar. I'll try to summarize everything and explain it in a way that most of you will understand because you are from different backgrounds or different levels of education. But let me know if you have any questions. We have still around 10, 12 minutes for your questions. If you have any question personally about my background or about machine learning, AI, healthcare, or machine learning in healthcare, or any other question that you have.
So Ali, I can read some of the questions that we have. One of them kind of discusses, is there a limit to having, several hidden layers in a model?
That's a great question. So, okay, so I kept in mind that reinforcement learning question. I'm going to talk about it at the end. So in machine learning, we have a concept called overfitting, which means that you are trying to get better and better in your training. So you have some data, you are training your model, you want to identify those relationships, as I said. But at the end, you want to use it for a new data point. If you increase number of hidden layers, it means that you're making your neural network more complicated. More complexity may result in overfitting, which means that you may get better in your training set, but you get worse in your test set, in the sample, in the new sample that you try to predict in future.
The second question that we have, a little bit more aspirational to the younger attendees. What advice would you give to someone looking to gain exposure in machine learning in healthcare at a young age? Any sort of tips or suggestions on reading material that you would provide to them?
Yeah, so first of all, for any sort of application of machine learning in any topic, in my opinion, don't start with machine learning. Start with some high-level blogs or papers or something more application level to see how machine learning is used for this problem, not getting into the details. And then you can get into the details of the machine learning modeling and understand, okay, so this model was used for this problem, what other methodologies also could be used, or why this model was used, not the other one. But if you want to have a specific kind of references to read, email me or contact us anyway in LinkedIn, Twitter, or email us, and then I can provide you some high-level papers or books, and also some maybe lower-level information regarding machine learning.
Thanks, Ali. Another question, kind of talking about your journey through academia and through your life. Why don't you briefly talk about some of the challenges you faced moving across countries, and as your passions also changed?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I provided those details, some of the details, because I wanted to tell you, if you jump to different topics, it's fine. So you'll get somewhere at the end that you like, and then you continue working in that topic. So it was definitely challenging. It was not only about switching between different topics. I changed my country, so I had to leave many things behind, my family, my friends. And it's definitely challenging, and you have to keep that in mind when you try to go to another country. But it's about what you choose in life. First of all, we are living in an era that we can easily contact everyone. So that part is fine. But you have to think what you want to do in life. So regarding the career you want to choose, you may not know what will be eventually your career, but maybe there are some limitations in your home country or your home city. So you have to consider those and choose wisely in whatever age you are. But it is challenging. Don't underestimate it. But don't underestimate yourself. And that's very important. Human being is tough. So we can resolve the issue. We can get somewhere that we like to be. The most important fear that we usually have is not about losing friends. It's not about all those kind of things that I said. It's mainly about not becoming whoever we want to become.
Thanks. One question, Ali, that we see here is you talked about the different levels of information you can collect. Survey, macroscopic, microscopic.
Yeah.
When you're putting together these models, what sort of considerations do you need to have, in kind of deciding, all right, I want to go with this specific, data type?
Yeah. So when we talk about machine learning modeling, there are three things that come together, and they are not independent. We have data and data type, we have machine learning algorithm, and we have the task that we want to solve. So you cannot use whatever data to solve all the tasks, and vice versa. If you have a specific task, you cannot solve it with any sort of data type that you may have access to. So for example, if you want to work on drug discovery, as we do in Cyclica, we are working with protein level information. We cannot use CT scan. So depending on the task you have to collect right information. You can use public repositories if they exist. If not, you have to generate the data yourself or in collaboration. And then you have to implement right machine learning algorithm based on the data type you have. As I said, there are different, for example, in neural network, you have different type of neural network modeling. One of them is called convolutional neural network. So if you have images, convolutional neural network is suggested. If you don't have images, you cannot implement convolutional neural network in whatever data type.
Thanks, Ellie. Another question that we have, maybe you'll like this question. What is the most interesting use case of AI in healthcare that you've seen other than for drug discovery?
That's a very interesting question. Okay, so my interest has been mainly in the molecular level information. So I can say drug discovery, and the other one that people are working on is something called personalized medicine. And it's not about discovering drug, it's about assigning right treatment for every patient. Imagine you have collection of drugs already approved by FDA, so you have those drugs already in clinical setting, and you need to use molecular level information, or in future, maybe imaging information, to assign right treatment to that patient. Because now it's mainly, for example, in cancer, you have pool of drugs that are used for the disease, or you have one or few drugs that you know they work, but you don't know which one works the best for that specific patient. So I think precision medicine or personalized medicine is a very important and interesting topic, in my opinion.
Building on your thoughts, Ellie, what are your thoughts on the direction of proteomic interaction predictions using natural language processing?
That's a cool idea, and there have been people working on it, but honestly, it's hard to say. So from technical point of view, it is possible. If it will eventually results in a better performance compared to other type of machine learning modeling, so for that specific task, and use other data types, I'm not sure. So imagine, let me give you an example. In DNA, there was a challenge as part of Dream Challenge, and the goal was to predict which protein interact with which part of DNA. Okay, so for that, people have used many different algorithms. Convolutional neural network, recurrent neural network. So recurrent neural network is something that was used before for text mining, so natural language processing or other tasks. And it's a sequential process that you try to predict next sequence from the current one. And so, but interestingly, as I remember, logistic regression was the winner, if I'm not wrong. So it's not about complexity of the methodology that give you the best results. So it's about combination of the algorithm and the data. And eventually you have to try those algorithms to know which one works the best. When you have more data, it is not related to natural language processing anymore. So that part is done. But when you have more data, usually people go for deep learning, but not necessarily it's a good idea to jump into deep learning. Okay.
Thanks, Ellie. Oh, we have one more question here.
So let me answer that reinforcement learning before we go to the next one.
Sure.
We still have 3 minutes for the 1 hour time we consider. So for reinforcement learning, as I said, is about learning from experience. Okay. So if you can somehow consider the experimental data you have in a way that it is somehow similar to having experience. So instead of using all the data, you can have it in the sequential way that the model sees it as some sort of experience. That is possible for sure. But if you consider it as something similar to a game of Atari or Go, we cannot simulate many things in biology like Atari. We don't have a computer to generate tumor. Okay, so when that's a problem, reinforcement learning sometimes gets stuck. So when we have ton of data, like in protein drug interaction, we may be able to somehow arrange the data in a way to implement reinforcement learning that model sees it as some sort of experience instead of having them all together. But when you have specific task, not necessary, and you have low amount of data, not necessarily we can implement reinforcement learning, because there is no experimental technology to do those kind of experiments pretty fast, to generate thousands of data points every day or even every year sometimes. And also we don't have any kind of simulation to generate those and use it in reinforcement learning setting. So there are some challenges, there are some possibilities, and it was a very summarized and short answer. It's definitely not a complete answer, and I hope it was a bit clear about the application of reinforcement learning in biology and healthcare. Okay, sorry, Davish.
Right, last question. What advice would you kind of pass on to your, undergraduate self, really, entering academia and, the world of research?
So getting into graduate studies is, I suggest it, okay? But it also depends on you. So I liked it, especially if you get into master's level, because masters give you the experience of doing research before getting into PhD, because PhD is long, it's 4 or 5 years. PhD, in average, you have to work 4 or 5 years on your PhD projects, but master's is usually around 2 years shorter. You get research experience. It may even help you in job market. And also you realize if you want to get into PhD or not. That's my suggestion. And if you paid attention in the first part of the presentation, I did this as well. So I got into my master's, realized what I want to do, and then went into PhD. I have friends, they got into master's and then realized they don't want to do PhD, and that's fine too.
Thanks, Ellie. Just looking at the time, I think we'll end things here. Thank you so much for presenting today. Next week, we'll be talking about sort of the ethics and use of AI in different settings, including healthcare. So please stay tuned for that session covered by Andrew Brereton at Cyclica.
Thanks,
Thank you
David.
for attending.
Thank you, guys.